Mr. X, since your split with the Black Muslim movement, have you formed your own group?
Yes.
And also, you say that you don't believe that Martin Luther King has solutions. What are your solutions?
Well, first, the split resulted in the formation of two groups. Those who left the Black Muslim movement regrouped into what has now become known as the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, which is strictly religious, based upon the religion as it is taught in Mecca and Cairo and other centers of Islamic religious learning. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization is non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings.
Now, this is very laudable, but how?
Well, by any means necessary. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not of violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
I think a lot of people are confused by the new Arabic name, El Hajj, Malik, El Shabazz.
I've always had the name on my passport, Malik El Shabazz, I only used it in the Muslim world. Well, Hajj is a title that is given to any Muslim who makes the pilgrimage to Mecca during the official Hajj season.
Well, will you now use Shabazz and drop X?
I'll probably continue to use Malcolm X and I'll probably use it as long as the situation that produced it exists.
You don't feel that Shabazz takes the place of X?
My going to Mecca and going into the Muslim world, into the African world, and being recognized and accepted as a Muslim and as a brother may solve the problem for me personally. But I personally feel that my personal problem is never solved as long as the problem is not solved for all of our people in this country. So I remain Malcolm X as long as there is a need to protest and struggle and fight against the injustices that our people are involved in this country.
Malcolm, do you intend to lead the charge in the United Nations?
Well, I find that to say you're going to lead something creates a lot of hostility, division, jealousy, and envy. I hope to work with any group of leaders or any group of organizations to do whatever is necessary to see that this problem is brought before the United Nations.
Have you had any commitments from any nations in Africa to support you in such a move?
I would rather not say at this time. But one thing I found in my travels, all of them look upon us as their long-lost brother.
You realize the implication is that you have had such commitments when you say...
This is your interpretation of what I said. One thing that I found in all of my travels was that all of the Africans, not only the Africans, but the Asians and the Muslims, look upon us as their long-lost brothers. And America had actually tricked many of them into a hands-off policy by giving them the impression that she was honestly trying to do something to solve the problem. My argument over there was designed to prove that it is impossible for the United States government to solve the race problem. It's impossible.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please.
I think you're right in my chair.
The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in South Africa, those Africans aren't faced with bayonets and aren't faced with police dogs. I would be not a man. If I was in a position to bring it in front of the United Nations and didn't do so, I wouldn't be a man.
You prepared to work with some of the leaders of the other civil rights organizations?
Certainly, certainly. We will work with any groups, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results.
Malcolm, your more controversial remarks was a call for black people to get rifles and form rifle clubs sometime back. Do you still favor that for self-defense?
I don't see why that should be controversial. I think that if white people found themselves the victim of the same kind of brutality that black people in this country face, and they saw that the government was either unwilling or unable to protect them, that the intelligence on the part of the whites would make them get some rifles and shotguns and protect themselves. Now, Negroes are developing some kind of intellectual maturity too, and they can see that having waited upon the government to protect them has been a wait that has been in vain. So any of them who live in areas where the government is not able to do its job, then we do have to get together and do a job of protecting ourselves.
Malcolm, on your trip abroad, you said you sensed a feeling of great brotherhood, and that conceivably you would be working toward integration in this country now. At least this is what you're reported to have said. Have you any comment on it?
I don't think that I ever mentioned anything about working toward integration. They haven't even got integration right here in New York City. You have worse integration problems in the North than they have in the South. So if it doesn't work if you can't bring about integration in New York City as international, cosmopolitan, up-to-date as it's supposed to be, you'll never get integration anywhere else in the country.
Does your new beard have any religious significance?
No, not particularly, but I do think that you'll find black people in America, as they strive to throw off the shackles of mental colonialism, will also probably reflect an effort to throw off the shackles of cultural colonialism, and they may begin to reflect desires of their own, with standards of their own.
Why are they threatening your life?
Well, primarily because they're afraid that I will tell the real reason that I'm out of the black Muslim movement, which I never told. I kept to myself. But the real reason is that Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretary. The one who first made me aware of this was Wallace Muhammad, Mr. Muhammad's son. And I had stated in a newspaper article about an effort to take my life back in January, and at that time the Muslims denied it. In fact, they tried to make it appear to my brother that I was insane. But on a program in Chicago called Hotline, moderated by Wesley South, John Ali, the national secretary, admitted that they absolutely were going to kill me.
Do you feel that your message of love that you brought back from Islam is the real reason they're after you, because you're not hating as hard as they want you to?
Well, I never did hate anybody hard. But I do know that when I wrote that letter saying that there were white people in Mecca, it shook up a lot of Muslims, because most of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad absolutely believed that it was impossible, physically impossible, I should say divinely impossible, for a white person to go to Mecca. And my trip there shattered that image, or that misconcept.
Anyone call you directly, Malcolm?
I've been receiving calls ever since I left the black Muslim movement.
And what sort of calls, Malcolm? You're disenchanted in view of the fact that these men who were your brothers are making threats against your life?
No, because actually it's not their fault. Now, Joseph and the officials, they have a knowledge of what it's all about. But the rank-and-file Muslim brother does not know what it's all about. They are, out of religious sincerity, they think that they are doing the will of Allah by protecting a man who I myself taught them was divine. So I don't in any way fault them. But those who are over them and give the orders, and actually the ultimate order comes from Elijah Muhammad himself. As long as I represented the black Muslim movement as an example of morality, unity, and militancy, as long as I could do that, I represented it. It was when I realized that it could not be represented as that I came on and started working among the non-Muslim Negroes, as I announced in January, or rather March, and I had no intention of ever even speaking on this. Had they left me alone, you still wouldn't know what really took place.
What would you take to protect yourself from this threat?
I take no steps. I have a rifle. If anybody comes to my house without a good reason, I intend to try and use it, and that's all. I don't worry. I tell you, I'm a man who believed that I died 20 years ago, and I live like a man who is dead already. I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
Well, these revelations that you are now making about Elijah Muhammad, what effect should they have on his following?
Well, I very much doubt that any of his followers who really are aware of what he has done would continue to follow him. He may try and justify it by saying that he's a Muslim and that a Muslim has a right to these wives. If this were the case, these sisters should not have been humiliated. These sisters have been looked upon for the past 5 years, or 6 years, or 7 years as being guilty of having committed fornication. They have been debased, they have been degraded. I have heard him, himself, refer to them as having disgraced him. So if they were his wives, he should have given them a position of respect so that all of his followers would respect them and that they would have the protection of his followers today.
Well, do you feel that you then, perhaps, now should take over the leadership of the black Muslims?
No, I have no desire to take over the leadership of the black Muslims, and I have never had that desire. But I do have this desire. I have a desire to see the Afro-American in this country get the human rights that are his due. I believe that the Islam religion is the best religion for our people because it creates unity and it gives one dignity and racial confidence and all of these things that are necessary to make a complete human being.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
What do you mean?
When you understand the makeup of the Muslim movement and the psychology of the Muslim movement, I myself, by having confidence in the leader of the Muslim movement, if someone came to me and I had no knowledge whatsoever of what had taken place, and they told me what I'm saying, I would kill them, myself. The only thing that would prevent me from killing someone who made a statement like this, they would have to be able to let me know that it's true. Now, if anyone had come to me other than Mr. Muhammad's son, I never would have believed it, even enough to look into it. But I had been around him so closely, I had seen indications of the reality of it, but my religious sincerity made me block it out of my mind.
Have you received threats on your life?
Oh, yes. I first received threats on my life in January, when it first became known that I had come back to New York and told the captain of the fruit in New York, who was my right-hand man formerly, and also the secretary of the New York Mosque and the minister in Boston. When it became known that I had told them, then an effort was made to shut me up. One brother encouraged to go out to my house and shut me up. And fortunately, it was a brother who was well capable of doing so, but it was a brother who was highly intelligent. He was academically equipped to think for himself. And what he was told to do didn't add up. And fortunately, he was the one who put out a feeler to me to find out what was wrong. And I opened his eyes. And then he opened the eyes of the same crew whose job it is to do this kind of work.
You mean he was going to kill you?
Oh, yes. An attempt was made to get one of them to wire my car with an explosive. That one is with me right now.
Elijah Muhammad says of the Muslims, we carry no arms, and we do not seek to win victory with arms. We do nothing to others that we would not have done unto us.
2 brothers were sent after me with revolvers by Joseph, the captain of the fruit in New York. They were armed. When a Muslim is attacked, and you'll find this to be the pattern, when the Muslims were attacked in Monroe, Louisiana, Elijah Muhammad gave no signal to anybody across the nation to come to the defense of their brothers. When our brothers were attacked in Los Angeles, again Elijah Muhammad gave no signal to anybody to come to the defense of those brothers. Never have the Muslims anywhere in the country gotten any kind of instruction from the national office or headquarters on how to defend themselves when they are attacked by outsiders. The only times the Muslims have ever been given any instructions to commit violence is when that violence is directed against a fellow Muslim. His followers are violent against Negroes.
Against Negroes?
Yes, his followers will go out and attack another Negro, like they will attack me, or they will brutalize a fellow Muslim who breaks the law. But you don't find those same followers going out and becoming involved in the Negro struggle in any way whatsoever. Now, the violence that he accuses me of is my tendency to want to participate in the struggle of the Negro at all levels. This is what he calls violence.
As far as you are concerned, you will accept the fealty, if you will, of any Negro anywhere under any conditions.
You have to define fealty.
You want them to give you their loyalty.
Not me, their loyalty. I'm not seeking for the loyalty of any Negro, but I am seeking for Negroes to learn how to be loyal to themselves. And when the Negro learns how to be loyal to himself, our problem is pretty well solved.
Minister Malcolm, you have suggested that there are all kinds of movements in Harlem growing that you and I don't know about.
Oh yes, frustration itself has been sufficient, all that was necessary to make Negroes realize the importance of banding together. And Negroes are banding together.
Banding together in what kind of movements?
Different kinds of movements, all kinds of movements, and they remain almost invisible. They remain almost unknown, but yet they are there. When I say invisible, I mean invisible in the sense that their existence is unknown, and no matter how much you try and track them down, you can't find them. And never try and find them through the Negro leaders. The Negro leaders are famous as apologists. If you recall, one of the most famous Negro leaders in 1959 was asked by you about the black Muslim movement. And he said he knew nothing about it. And the next moment you flashed a picture on the screen with him shaking hands with me. So if you will recall. So this is their policy. This is their attitude or their reaction. They never know what's going on in the Negro community.
And what form will the activities of these various so-called invisible movements take in Harlem this summer?
An example, Commissioner Murphy. Almost every statement that Commissioner Murphy makes would give you the impression that he's encouraging the police, rank-and-file policemen, to take whatever method or measures necessary to hold the Negroes in check. He feeds the type of statistics to the white public to make them think that Harlem is a complete criminal area, that everyone is prone toward violence. This gives the police the impression that they can then go and brutalize the Negroes or suppress the Negroes or even frighten the Negroes. Whenever something happens, 20 police cars converge on one area. This doesn't frighten Negroes. So it means that someone is either misinforming Commissioner Murphy and making him use tactics this year that he would not use 4 years ago or that the former policeman Kennedy would not use. And this force that is so visible in the Harlem community creates a spirit of resentment in every Negro. They think they're living in a police state and they become hostile toward the policeman. They think that the policeman is there to be against them rather than to protect them. And these thoughts, these frustrations, these apprehensions automatically are sufficient to make these Negroes begin to form means and ways to protect themselves in case the police themselves get too far out of line.
You have called for self-defense units, rifle clubs, ready to execute on the spot those who threaten Negroes.
I don't think that I said that.
Yes, you did.
No, I don't think I said that.
All right.
I have called for rifle clubs in areas where the police, whether it be federal, state, or city, have proven their inability or their unwillingness to defend Negroes, the lives and the property of Negroes. Then it's only intelligent and it's only right that Negroes protect themselves, and I have encouraged them to buy a rifle and a shotgun, which according to the Constitution is legal.
For what?
Not buy a pistol or something like that, but a rifle or a shotgun, which is constitutionally legal.
For what purpose?
So that at any time, anyone makes any effort whatsoever to brutalize them or attack them or endanger them, they should have something to defend themselves. And in a country that spends, I think, $50 billion a year for defense alone, I'm shocked that there's apprehension over Negroes trying to do something to defend themselves.
Well, who will determine when the Negro is endangered?
I think that if the government is concerned, instead of being so worried about what the Negro is going to do, the government should stop dragging its feet and take the initiative necessary to eliminate the injustices that frustrate Negroes and drive them into a method of defense such as this.
You've said, Minister Malcolm, you have to expect the Negroes to rise up sooner or later.
Oh, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, just the same thing that it meant in South Vietnam and these other places where you find oppressed people. Sooner or later, they rise up against the oppressor. When the Jews were being brutalized in Poland, there came a time when they couldn't take it anymore, and they fought back. They didn't have too much to fight with, but they fought back. And I think every oppressed people, no matter how meek and humble they are, after you drive them so far, they're going to strike back.
Well, does that mean that you expect to organize battalions or paramilitary units in various Negro ghettos around the country and establish this coming summer for violent action?
No, but I think that most Afro-Americans, so-called Negroes, have reached the point of no return. and are taking it upon themselves to be prepared if the necessity ever arrives where they will have to do something to defend themselves.
Well, there was talk a month ago, you remember, of a group in Harlem called the Blood Brothers, who left the black Muslims when you did, and then later parted company with you, we are told, because the tactics that you espoused were too mild. What do you know of them, the Blood Brothers?
Well, I certainly wouldn't apologize for them. I think that if such a group as Blood Brothers exists...
Does it?
I say well, I think all Negroes are blood brothers. Every Negro I know is my blood brother.
Oh, but Minister Malcolm, we're talking about a group said to number up to 400, probably more, who confess themselves to be anti-white as you are. They disbelieve in nonviolence as you do. One group among them is said to believe in violence, even in murder, almost for violence sake. Another group among them are said to believe in violence only for retribution, to strike back.
Well, if such a group as the Blood Brothers exists, it doesn't shock me. I would only be shocked at white people being shocked, because the conditions that prevail, Mike Wallace, are such that it's a miracle that such group hasn't formed a long time ago.
But do they exist, to your knowledge?
I think every Negro in Harlem is a blood brother, whether he admits it or not. When you walk through the streets of Harlem, you hear this comment and that comment, and you get the impression that everybody is ready.
They have arms?
I think Harlem has always been armed.
Do you look for violence in Harlem this summer?
Yes, I do look for violence. When you say Harlem, mind you, Harlem is New York City. Queens is Harlem. Brooklyn is Harlem. The Bronx is Harlem. Westchester is Harlem.
I mean, could you not become the leader of this kind of a group?
Which kind of a group?
A violent group.
It's not a case of becoming a leader of a violent group. I don't think any group, even that's ready, wants violence. It's a case of...
Is this not, Minister Malcolm, a call to action of sorts that you are raising here and now?
I don't have to raise a call to action. And this is what I'm trying to make white people see. They have lost their ability to be objective where the race problem is concerned, primarily because they know that no real meaningful results have come from the Negro struggle. And in defense of this, they always call it or label it violence.
You really believe that any meaningful result is going to come from violence?
It's not a case of violence. I think that, see, if you could get away from looking at it as violence, then you would be objective and see that actually all it is a tendency to react to what they are confronting. White people don't realize how frustrated Negroes have become.
I think they have come to understand the Negro's frustration, but they are also of the opinion that no good can possibly come from violence.
If they are of that opinion, Mike, if you think that the powder keg that's in your house is going to explode under certain conditions, either you have to remove the powder keg or remove the conditions. You can't stand there and label the powder keg as an enemy when you have the ability or have it within your power to change the condition, and it won't explode.
Do you know of any contingency plan for action?
No. I know of none. But I don't think if you go and study the history of oppressed people, usually their initial action is not a plan. Usually it's a reaction, and it's on the part of a few, and then everybody gets right on in with it. And I think you'll find that if Negroes ever have to resort to any kind of physical action to defend themselves, many white people will be on the side of Negroes. Many white people are fed up with what the Negroes suffer. And this is what I had to become aware of on my pilgrimage to Mecca. I could see then that there are many white people in this country who will side with the Negro in whatever he has to do to protect himself.
You have changed your attitude about the white man in the United States to some extent.
Well, I've broadened my scope. Travel broadens your scope. It gives you a wider understanding. And I have, in my many lectures on college campuses, seen many whites, even as a black Muslim, whose reaction to much of what I had to say showed me that they were genuinely concerned. Some weren't genuinely concerned, but many of them were. And this element is increasing.
But that's a considerable change of opinion in Malcolm X.
No, today I'm speaking for myself. Formerly I spoke for Elijah Muhammad. And everything I said was, Elijah Muhammad teaches us thus and so. I'm speaking now from what I think, from what I have seen, from what I have analyzed, and the conclusions that I have reached.
Then the white man is no longer the devil, and he is no longer bound to be evil.
The Holy Quran teaches us to judge a man by his conscious behavior. by his intention. And my reason for going to Mecca was to get a better understanding of the religion of Islam and what the Quran teaches. So I judge a man by his conscious behavior. I am not a racist. I don't subscribe to any of the tenets of racism.
Then there are good whites and good blacks and bad whites and blacks.
It's not a case of being good and bad, good or bad blacks and whites. It's a case of being good or bad human beings.
Black Muslims have sometimes been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
There's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Mr. X?
I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people. And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood, I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who aren't willing to accept it.
Of course, I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
That'd be a pretty good answer.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel. So I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
One of the most powerful, and in many ways the most perplexing movements in the United States of America is the black Muslims. They are Negro extremists, and they are not only a political movement, they're also a religious movement, and indeed they're a way of life. Their followers, at least 200,000 of them, embrace the faith of Islam and its customs. They want nothing less than a separate Negro state within the United States. But like all revolutionary movements, they face a challenge, because one of their most forceful leaders has now broken away, dissatisfied with the policy of the black Muslims. And he's now the leader of his own independent group, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. By any means. By any means.
By any means.
A bloodbath?
Well, I think that as deplorable as the word bloodbath may sound, I think the condition that Negroes in America have already experienced too long is just as deplorable. And if it takes something that deplorable to remove this other deplorable condition, then I think it's justified.
But don't you think there's also justification in the case for the gradual white and Negro coming together, this gradual integration policy? Because after all, it's a change of of heart and mind and everything else for both sides.
In America, I don't think there's any gradual coming together. There may be a gradual coming together at the top. A few hand-picked, upper-crust, bourgeois Negroes are coming together with the so-called liberal element in the white community. But at the mass level, I don't think there's any real, honest, sincere coming together. If there's anything, there's a widening of the gap.
Now, if there is this widening of the gap, then, when do you see this explosion taking place?
Well, there doesn't necessarily have to be an explosion if the proper type of education is brought about to give the people the correct understanding of the causes of these conditions that exist, and to try and educate them away from this animosity and hostility.
But this education takes a long time.
Not as long as legislation. Education will do it much faster than legislation. You can't legislate goodwill.
Now, you said in the end of 1963 that 1964 will be a very explosive year, and in many ways, Mr. X, it has. Has it been as explosive as you would have hoped?
That's not the question. Has it been as explosive as I would have thought? It wasn't as explosive as I would have thought. I think the miracle of 1964 was the ability of the American Negro to restrain himself against extreme unjust provocation and dilly-dallying on the part of the United States government where his rights are concerned.
Will he restrain himself so in 1965?
I very much doubt that he will restrain himself so very much longer.
So instead of legislation, in my opinion, it takes education. The whites have to be re-educated so that the racism that they have in their heart can be eliminated, and our people have to be re-educated so that we will know how to do something for ourselves instead of waiting for others to do it for us all the time.
Well, how will that re-education be brought about?
Well, just as in World War II, this country could use its news media to propagandize and make the whole American public love the Russians and the Chinese and hate the Germans and the Japanese. And then after the war, they changed it and made the American public love the Germans and love the Japanese, hate the Russians and hate the Chinese, which shows that they can make the American public love whom they will and hate whom they will. And that same process can be used to re-educate the American public and show white people how to love black people and show black people how to do something to stand on our own feet and solve our own problems. The black man doesn't have to be taught to love the white man. The white man has to be taught to love the black man.
Do you think the Civil Rights Bill, when it's passed, is a sign of better times for Negroes in this country?
No. As I said before, the legislation won't solve our problems. New York City has all of the laws. It has FETC. And still there's job discrimination in this city. That type of law hasn't solved the problem. And it's the same with the segregated educational system. It exists here the same as it exists in the South. Now, the law here is on the side of an integrated school system, but you still don't have an integrated school system.
What do you think of Senator Goldwaters' stand on the Civil Rights Bill?
Well, he's probably being more honest than the other politicians are, even though his stand is the wrong stand, an unjust stand. Still, he's being more honest than the other white politicians are. I don't think that in his heart, Lyndon B. Johnson's stand is any different from Goldwaters' stand. Lyndon B. Johnson is taking a stand that is for political expediency. And it's the same with all of the so-called liberal element. It's political expediency, politics.
Now, Malcolm, on one side you're talking about brotherhood and education, and on the other side you're talking about guerrilla movements in the South. Where do you stand?
Both of them are educational. We demand our right to have access to equality of opportunity to anything that this country stands for, as long as we're born here and come within the confines of the Constitution that governs this country. Now, in line with that, we feel that we have the right to defend ourselves whenever we take measures to participate as citizens and unlawful elements like the Ku Klux Klan get in our way. We think the two positions are consistent. In fact, one complements the other.
When you say defend themselves, what sort of methods of defense are you advocating?
By any means necessary. Our goal is to force the United States government to take its role as a government and take its responsibility as a government and occupy the state of Mississippi and give our people the protection that they cannot get under the police system that now exists in that state.
Malcolm, tell me why you want to send guerrillas to Mississippi.
Well, Professor Mark DeWolf Howell of the Harvard Law School, speaking for 29 other law professors, pointed out that the United States government could intervene by law in the state of Mississippi by sending troops. And since the Attorney General and others in the federal government have pointed out that they don't intend to send federal troops in themselves to protect the lives and the property of the Negroes who are being brutalized down there, it's our intention to try and organize the black people or the American Negroes in this country into self-defense units in that area. In areas where the government is unwilling or unable to defend our people, we will defend our people ourselves.
Just what exactly would these units do? Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth situation?
Well, as long as it is an intelligently organized effort that is being made, the discipline involved will keep our people acting intelligently and discriminately. But if something isn't done in this country to organize Negroes who are fed up with this nonviolent, turn-the-other-cheek approach in a sensible direction to bring about the halting of this brutality that we are constantly the victims of, then Negroes are going to react in a disorganized way, in an unintelligent way, and an indiscriminate way when it comes to retaliation. So we actually think that we're doing more to uphold the law and protecting the lives and property of our people in an organized way than to sit around and let a disorganized effort develop.
Would they need training?
Oh yes. Anytime you are sending people against an enemy on the front lines, they need training. And the only criticism that I have of the students who have been sent in, I think that the organization that sent these students in to show our people there how to become involved in this voters registration is a great step. And the whites involved should be given credit as well as the Negroes who will receive the benefit of it. All of them should be given credit. But I believe that they made a tactical mistake in sending these young people in and not showing them how to defend themselves, because to send them in this area with no idea of how to defend themselves against the brutal attacks of the Klan is equivalent to sending soldiers on the front lines in Korea or in South Vietnam or Laos. And that enemy over there is nowhere near as vicious as the Klan and the White Citizens Council and other racist elements in this country.
Can you give me some specific ideas of what you would do?
No. I wouldn't give any specific ideas of what should be done or how we would go about doing it. But I can say that our people have been in the armed services. We have many Negroes in this country who know every type of fighting tactic imaginable in warfare. And if they can go into Korea and South Vietnam and Laos and train others in guerrilla warfare, they can come right over here and train our own people in defense tactics that can bring an end to this Klan-like brutality. Instead of our people continuing to let the Klan and these other racist elements intimidate us with murder and organized brutality, if the Klan knows that we will retaliate, that we can retaliate and will retaliate, and do unto them as they have been doing unto us, we feel that that in itself will be sufficient to hold them in check. And if the government doesn't want this type of situation to develop, then it is up to the United States government to answer the plea of James Foreman and the other Negro leaders in the South and give them federal troops to protect the lives and property of our people. Those from outside would go in for the purpose of organizing the self-defense units. And one of the steps in that organization involves making the Negroes in Mississippi see that they are within their rights to defend themselves rather than always allow themselves to be the victims of the attacks by the Klan and the White Citizens Council and other racist elements.
What would you do in a specific case, say, of the 3 missing boys right now?
Well, one of the things I would do if I wanted to find them, I would look in the police station in Mississippi. And when you think in terms of the Ku Klux Klan as being the ones who are responsible for them being missing, then in the state of Mississippi, most of the policemen belong to the Klan. The two organizations are interwoven with each other. So we would look in some of the police stations or start questioning the police. There's no need to question the people out there in the street. The police know more about where these persons are, whether they're dead or alive, than anyone else in Mississippi.
When you say you'd question the police, do you really think you'd get them to talk to you?
No. So it means that we've reached the point where talking is a waste of time.
What would you do?
It has become necessary for the American Negro, of which there are 22 million, to go on record to let the world know that since the American government in Washington, D.C. has proven its unwillingness or its inability to protect us in the state of Mississippi, the black man in this country is obligated to take it upon himself to organize and put forth the efforts that are necessary to give our people the protection that has not been forthcoming from the government. Well, the alternative is that the federal government, which is supposed to protect the rights of Negroes the same as it protects the rights of whites, must take the responsibility of recognizing the fact that the state of Mississippi is part of the United States and is under the jurisdiction of the United States government, and therefore the United States government is responsible for all of the violence, the bloodshed, and brutality that takes place in Mississippi. In the past, as long as our people have been the victim of brutality, the government has dragged its feet. So we have to create a situation where we can retaliate and create a situation that will force the United States government to occupy the state of Mississippi and do for us in protecting us as she has done for others while trying to protect others.
You mentioned that you would use white people to infiltrate the Klan to gather intelligence.
Yes, in my speaking engagements around the country on the various campuses, I have found many young whites who were sincere in their desire to see an end brought to racism. And many of them are now actively involved in SNCC and the nonviolent approach. But those same ones who are involved in the nonviolent approach would become involved in any approach that they thought would bring an end to racism. And I think that most whites as well as blacks can see that from experience in Mississippi and other parts of the South, the racist element there are too morally bankrupt to react in a positive way to the nonviolent approach.
Could you trust a person who belonged to the group that you used to call the Blue-Eyed Devils with information? Would you trust his information?
When I referred to them as the Blue-Eyed Devils, I was speaking for Elijah Muhammad. When I referred to them as a race of devils, I was speaking then for Elijah Muhammad. I don't speak for Elijah Muhammad today. In fact, if Elijah Muhammad is the leader of the black people in this country, as he professes, then he should be concerned with the brutal treatment that our people are receiving in the state of Mississippi and send his well-trained Fruit of Islam down there to protect our people instead of sending them out here in the street to attack former Muslims who don't want to go along with his program anymore.
You would trust a white man's information, though?
Well, I have gotten information from whites in the past, even while I was a member of the black Muslim movement, that I found to be pretty authentic.
Malcolm, what's your ultimate goal?
My ultimate goal is to make whatever contribution I can toward bringing about complete freedom, justice, and equality for black people in this country, complete respect and recognition as human beings. And the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which we've now formed, has that as its aim, to lift the struggle for freedom of the Negro in this country from the level of civil rights to the level of human rights, and carry out a program which will be designed to make us recognized and respected as human beings, as members of the human family, wherein our human rights will be respected, and then we think our civil rights, the recognition and respect of our civil rights, will be automatic.
Could you possibly go a little further and make it very clear to everybody now what the differences are between Elijah Muhammad and the black Muslims and the worldwide Muslim movement as you see it?
Well, number one, Elijah Muhammad teaches his followers that God came in the flesh and taught him what he now knows and that which he now calls Islam, and by so doing made him the messenger of God, or the messenger of Allah, so to speak. And every black Muslim, I myself included, absolutely believed that God taught Elijah Muhammad and that Elijah Muhammad was a messenger of God. Whereas in the Muslim world, Muslims are taught La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the apostle of Allah, or messenger of Allah. And in that sense, Allah being supreme, the creator, omnipresent, omniscient, and all that, and Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad who was born in Arabia 1400 years ago, is the Muhammad that's being spoken of there. And in the Muslim world, the Muslims believe that Muhammad, who was born in Arabia 1400 years ago, is the last prophet or last messenger. So that anyone who comes along and says that God in the flesh, or Allah, came and taught him and made him his messenger, absolutely is diametrically opposed to the orthodox teachings of the religion of Islam.
There's an old biblical story about someone who asked, I guess it was a Hebrew prophet, to stand on one foot and explain Judaism to him. Don't want you to do that, but if you could possibly give us some idea of some of the other basic tenets of the Muslim religion, something that's fairly foreign to many people in the Western world?
Well, the real Muslim religion teaches the oneness of God. It teaches that since there is one God, he has one religion, which is called Islam, which means complete submission to the one God. And since there is one God with only one religion, then all of the prophets who came forth on this earth to teach religion taught the same religion. So that to a Muslim, Abraham and Moses and Jesus taught the same religion that the Prophet Muhammad taught. And therefore there's no opposition whatsoever, no division, no room for argument even. And it's a religion that creates brotherhood. After one accepts the religion of Islam, he practices prayer, charity, fasting, and if it's possible, he makes the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca at least once during his lifetime.
Tell me, Malcolm X, what were some of the countries that you covered in this recent tour of yours?
I visited Egypt, Arabia, Kuwait, Lebanon, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Zanzibar, Tanganyika, which has now become Tanzania. I visited Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, and Algeria. Also Geneva and Paris and London.
What were some of the examples, some of the first things that struck your mind along this idea of brotherly love that you found in the Muslim religion?
Well, in the Muslim world, you don't find anyone judged by a yardstick that's based upon skin color. And in the Muslim world, you find some of the darkest people at the top and some of the lightest ones at the bottom, and vice versa. Whether or not you can rise is not judged by your color. It's what you are, what you do, what you can produce, what you can accomplish. That's the yardstick that's used for judgment.
Were you well received in these countries as you traveled through?
Well, in Egypt, I had an audience with President Gamal Abdel Nasser for about an hour and a half. In Tanganyika, I spent 3 hours with Julius Nyerere. I flew from Tanganyika and Zanzibar to Kenya with Prime Minister Jomo Kenyatta, who's now President Jomo Kenyatta, and Dr. Milton Obote, who is the Prime Minister of Uganda. And when I was in Nigeria, I had an audience with President Ezekwe, and in Ghana, I had an audience with President Kwame Nkrumah. And in Guinea, I lived at President Sékou Touré's oceanside home for 3 days. I think that speaks for itself. Nowhere that I went did I run into any closed minds or closed hearts or closed doors.
Did you get a chance to speak to some of the people in these countries?
Oh yes, I got a chance to speak to people at all levels. In government, in religion, and just plain in the street.
Did these seem to be hopeful people, hopeful of the future in their countries?
Well, I think you'll find a more hopeful atmosphere in African countries today than ever before, and a great deal of confidence in their own ability to straighten out their own problems. When I first landed in Cairo in July, I might say this without your asking it, that America had a fairly good image. There were negative characteristics and reactions, but she had a fairly good image. By the time I had left in November, her image had become almost bankrupt in that her association with Moise Tshombe and the entire Congo operation during the months of July, August, September, and October turned the most moderate Africans against the United States. Just her identity with Tshombe and her involvement in the Congo, no African accepted it as something that was justified.